On this episode, I'm going to analyze 8 things about modern metalcore, what I think is really great, and the stuff I don't really like so much. Welcome, metalheads. I'm the host of Heavy Metal Philosophy and writer for Metal Digest, John Barbas. Make sure you stick around to the end of the episode for this week's Riff of the Week. Now, before we get started, I just want to say I'm not a boomer hater. I don't hate modern metalcore. I love a lot of it. I grew up with metalcore. I just remember when it was actually what the title says. It was hardcore kids playing metal riffs. It has since matured into something that's not that. And some of that is pretty great. I really love some of the innovation. And then some of it is just not for me. So the first aspect we're going to analyze is the guitar work. I'm a guitar player. This is easy for me, so let's start there. As I said in the beginning, I came from the beginning when metalcore was hardcore kids playing metal. I grew up on bands like Converge. There's a great band called Disembodied. Just totally exemplifies what that means. And then in the early 2000s came the wave that I call the heavy metalcore bands. And what I mean by that is these are bands that were heavily influenced by traditional heavy metal. It's not quite as hardcore as the 90s wave of metalcore. It's a lot more melodic. There's a lot of guitar harmonies. It sounds like these are the bands that really admired Iron Maiden and Judas Priest, traditional heavy metal bands. But they incorporated modern techniques and tones to create a very heavy sound. I'm talking about bands like As I Lay Dying, Killswitch Engage, Early Trivium. But now we're talking about the modern metalcore bands, the post-2010s. And these are the bands that grew up on Meshuggah. So again, the 90s bands, they grew up on punk. The 2000s bands grew up on heavy metal. And now we're talking about bands that grew up on Meshuggah. And all of them are incorporating djent into their guitar playing styles.
Lower. Lower.
On a positive note, when this first started happening, I thought it was great. I thought this is the future of metal. This is the next wave of sounds. We've had 30 years of horse galloping. We don't have to do horse galloping anymore. Chugga, 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 chugga. Now we're getting some new and inventive rhythms, and I just thought it was so great. Well, now we're a good 10 years into it, and it's not so new and innovative anymore. Now the djent style has become just as tired as the horse galloping style. All the metalcore bands are playing zeros and ones over and over and over again, and I've heard that bow wow sound so many times now. It's not new, it's not fresh, and it doesn't surprise me anymore. And then another aspect of the modern metalcore guitar playing that has both pros and cons to me is the guitar tone. On the one hand, you've got all these modern recording techniques, you've got all of this amp modeling and Kemper profiles, and now the guitar sounds so punchy, so crisp and distinct. It can get very heavy without becoming muddy and losing the low end. They've really figured out how to record it. The issue is there's no guitar players in the modern metalcore scene with their distinct guitar tone. Zakk Wylde has a distinct guitar tone. James Hetfield has a distinct guitar tone. Eric Rutan has a distinct guitar tone. Who's the new metalcore guy that's playing guitar that when you hear it, you go, oh yeah, that's that guy? Something about that digital Kemper profile sort of guitar tone, it's lacking the signature sound. And the final thing we'll talk about with modern metalcore guitar playing that's got both pros and cons, again, is the return of the guitar solo. I'm a guitar player, of course. I love guitar solos, and I could not be happier about the fact that bands are playing solos again. But it's also brought back the return of the guitar solo wankery. We got a lot of that in the 80s and the 90s, and it's back. All the guitar players are shredding their asses off. They're not really crafting their guitar solos. They're not really composing them. It's like, okay, yeah, this is the chord it's playing. This is the scale I can play. Fast as fuck, boy.
Fast as fuck, boy.
And at first, I thought it was really cool because there's all these new techniques coming out. And, as a guitar player, I thought that metal guitar playing was mature. But now I'm seeing guys do new stuff, new inventive stuff. The tapping, that's not new, but the way they're tapping is new. And I was like, wow, this is really great. But unfortunately, they all sound like YouTube guitar players. As soon as somebody came up with a cool technique, it's a copycat league. Everybody else started doing those techniques. They didn't become a certain guitar player's signature. And so all the guitar solos just kind of sound the same to me. Now, the second aspect of metalcore that we're going to analyze is the drums. You got to have guitar and you got to have drums for it to be heavy metal. And there's one thing that I really love about modern metalcore, and it's they don't rely on the blast beat. The blast beat's still there. You got to have the blast beat if it's going to be extreme metal, but it's just not all the time. Y'all know I'm a big Behemoth fan, but I can't listen to Behemoth all day long. There's only so much that on the snare drum that I can really take before I need some sort of a palate cleanser and listen to something else. Well, the modern metalcore guys, they don't do that from start to finish on the whole song. They've got more inventive drumming. These guys and gals are all influenced by, of course, heavy metal drummers, but they've also been influenced by other genres, particularly like hip hop and R&B. So you're seeing a lot of that sort of work in the drums, and it just makes it sound a little bit different. But then when the time calls for it, here comes the blast beats, here comes the double kick drums, just like I like it, at the appropriate time. Not nonstop, but sprinkled in when it makes it heavy. That's not to say that there aren't things about modern drumming that I don't like. What I really don't like about modern metalcore is it's all too precise. In the studio, they're lining it up precisely, and it sort of loses its humanity. I want to hear somebody play drums. I don't want to hear a metronome and then program drums. I want to hear a person play the drums, and I'm not really hearing that with modern metal these days. It sounds very digital and very precise. And listen, there's something to that. I don't want them to sound sloppy, but I do want them to sound human. I do want them to be emotive. When a measure comes around and you hit the tom, I want it to sound a little bit different the next time that measure comes around and you hit the tom again. Just a subtle difference would make it sound human. And then the third thing that we're going to analyze about modern metalcore is the bass. There's a rhythm section with bands. You got to have drums and the bass. So what are we going to talk about with bass on modern metalcore? There's no bass. There's no bass, y'all. All right, the fourth thing we're going to talk about with modern metalcore is the vocals. And one great thing about the vocals in modern metal is now we have amazing singers. Obviously back in the day, Bruce Dickinson's a great singer. Rob Halford's an amazing singer, the metal god. But during the opening days of thrash and death metal and black metal, wasn't really known for having great vocalists. And we never really cared. Just scream. We're happy. But with modern metalcore, we've got amazing singers. There's not really any bands that have hit it big that don't have highly skilled singers. And it's great. It makes for much better music. But you know what I don't like? It's pop. It's pop music. And I don't mean that when y'all clean sing and it's catchy, that's bad. Clean singing has its place, and I want every song to be catchy. I don't want it to not be something I remember. What I mean is it's literally pop music. If you sang those same melodies with that same delivery and it didn't have a guitar behind it, it would be a pop song. And I hate that. I want to listen to metal. I don't want to listen to pop. Especially in the last 5 years or so, they're pop songs, and then the breakdown is heavy. I don't want to have to wait for the breakdown for the song to be heavy. You're just doing a breakdown to keep your heavy metal street cred. But if I have to wait, okay, hold on, here it comes. Here's the breakdown. Now it's going to be heavy. That means the rest of the song is not heavy by definition. I hate that. And conversely, when bands don't do that, I really hate it when the verses are super heavy, nice false chord screams, but then all of the choruses are clean pop songs. And that's the formula. The chorus is supposed to be bigger than the verse. The chorus is supposed to have rise. And that's not just in metal. All music is that way. Country, rock and roll, The chorus is supposed to have rise. So when the verse is super heavy and then all the energy falls out and you go, yeah, real pretty during the chorus, I lose my erection. And nobody likes a flaccid philosopher. All right, the fifth aspect we're going to analyze is the lyrics. Obviously, the vocals have to say something. And what I really love about modern metalcore and metalcore in general is it doesn't have the same genre constraints that, say, death metal or black metal has to have. You know, if you're in a death metal band, you obviously have to talk about death. Now, there's some variety in that. You get your like slasher and zombie brutal gore with your cannibal corpses. You get your alien stuff with blood incantation. Cattle decapitation has their planetary existentialism. But at the end of the day, it's all about death. And black metal is all about nihilism and abstraction, and it has to be that. Well, metalcore doesn't have those rules. They can talk about whatever they want. And that's great. That means you get a wide variety of topics. You get a great band like who we interviewed last year, The Gloom in the Corner, that did a storytelling album in a fantasy universe. That's incredible. And I love that that's a thing. But you know what I don't like? I don't like it when it's emo. I don't want to hear breakup songs in my metal. I don't want to hear, oh, I'm so messed up because of my parents in my metal. I heard Stained back in the 90s. I don't need to hear that anymore. And then another aspect of that is those overcoming anthems. Wait a minute, John, you're a philosopher. Don't you like overcoming? Yes, of course. And I love Hatebreed. They do it really well. But I've just been to several scene shows where there's a metalcore band on and the singer gets on stage and delivers a soliloquy about how we can stick together and we can get over everything and overcoming adversity. And all I can think about, motherfucker, you're 24 and you came from the suburbs. Have you ever been divorced? I'm not trying to hear about your adversity and about all the things that you've overcome. I don't believe you. And that is one of the most important aspects of any metal, regardless of genre. We all crave authenticity. I'm not trying to hear that from a 22-year-old. You know, when Jamie Josta talks about overcoming pain and crushing through boundaries, I believe him. You, dude, I can tell that you bought all of your clothes at Hot Topic. I don't believe you. All right, the sixth aspect we're going to talk about with modern metal is the studio. And again, it's so great that now these people know how to use the studio. Back in my day, you had to go to an actual big time studio and pay a bunch of money, and you had to listen to the engineer, and they did most of all the magic, and we just kind of played our instruments, and we didn't really know what was going on until probably like our third or fourth time recording a project. And then we'd sort of start to learn how the whole thing works, what the knobs do, how to EQ things, where to place the mics, which amps to use, how to mix it, and which frequencies everything should sit in. That was a big learning process for us. And that's why all those records back in the day, they kind of sounded not so great at the beginning. And then over time, they started getting good production value. Now that's not really a thing. You know, these kids, they get on YouTube, they learn all this stuff, they do the plugins, and they are recording just fantastic sounding records. And as a consequence of not having the struggle to get the good sound, that frees them up to be more creative. They're not spending months and years trying to lock in a good guitar tone. They've got a great guitar tone. Just plug it in, start going, and that gives them room to experiment. Not to mention they don't have to pay so much money for studio time. They can do all kinds of stuff right there in the studio, right here in the office. And as a consequence, they've created some amazing sounds. They incorporate all kinds of electronic implements that just come up with these cool vibes and atmospheres. I think it's great. So what am I going to complain about with this one? It's too polished. I talked about it with the drums earlier. Everything is on the grid. It just doesn't have any nuance to it. It doesn't have the same feeling. From one verse to the next, it sounds exactly the same. Oh, here's the third chorus. Wait, is that the same drum fill again? Performed precisely the same? And just because you can put electronic stuff into it doesn't mean you should. Take a band like Falling in Reverse, who really incorporate the electronic sounds, and it's a part of the way the band sounds throughout all of their music. But a lot of bands aren't doing that. They're just putting it in on the intro, and then the rest of the song sounds nothing like that. Like, why did you put that in there? You just did it because you could, which doesn't make it good. All right, number 7. Let's talk about the hip-hop influence in modern metalcore. For the most part, I love it. We talked about it again earlier with the drums. I like that they're incorporating these styles into the beats. It gives it extra flavor. I really love what Polyphia is doing with that R&B sound. It sounds great, and it's different, and it makes it their sound. They definitely have a unique vibe that other bands don't have, and I love it. I love hearing new ways to experiment with metal, but I hate it when metalcore bands rap. Y'all can't rap. You suck at it. I don't hate rap. I love Sean Price. I love KRS-One. But these guys, y'all aren't rappers. You are rapping, and the things do rhyme in a cadence, but your flow and the tone of your voice is terrible. It's not hard at all. Your lyrics are not poetic. You're not a rapper. You suck at it. Please stop. We talked about modern metalcore being pop earlier. If I had to give y'all some advice, I'd say do what your fellow pop stars do, and when it comes time for a rap part, bring in a guest rapper that can actually rap good. If you can't rap good, don't do it. Bring in somebody that can. Bring in somebody that's authentic. Bring in somebody that I believe. All right, 8th and final thing that we're going to talk about. We absolutely cannot talk about metalcore without talking about breakdowns. It's become synonymous with the genre, and so again, we're going to start with the positive. Breakdowns, they are amazing. I love a good breakdown. Anything that's going to make me bang my head, I'm on board. I love metal. If I'm headbanging, I'm happy. But they're tired. They're tired, y'all. Breakdowns in modern music, it's kind of like guitar solos back in the glam metal era. Every song's got to have one. You know it's coming. Every time you hear a new single, you start it and you go, okay, I wonder when the breakdown's going to be. Just like in the 80s, we go, okay, where are they going to put a guitar solo? You don't have to do it every time. And as I said earlier, if it's the heaviest part of the song, then that means the rest of the song was not heavy. The rest of the song should also be hard. And like we talked about in the guitar section, lay off the djent a little bit. I'm not saying never do it. I'm saying there's more places on the guitar neck besides 0 and 1. And if you make a funky noise after that 0 and 1, cool. But that's not the formula. Please don't do formulaic breakdowns. And speaking of formulaic breakdowns, if I never hear a washed out EQ'd guitar leading into a breakdown again, that would be great. It was cool the first time I heard it, where it sounds like the guitar is underwater and it's playing the riff by itself before the drums come in, and then the breakdown hits super hard. The first time I heard that, I was like, oh yeah. But I've heard it 10 million times now. As soon as I hear the guitar EQ drop, I know, okay, here comes the breakdown. Now, there's something to be said about building anticipation for the breakdown. There's something to be said about that. But when I go, here comes the breakdown, that's bad. Don't do that. Surprise me. If the breakdown comes out of nowhere, that's going to make me bang my head. That's awesome. It shouldn't be verse, chorus, washed out EQ guitar leading into the breakdown, final chorus. Now, I'm not saying that you get away from the tried and true songwriting method. Of course, songs have to have verse, chorus, bridge, and another chorus. Of course. But you can do it a little bit different every now and again. Now, if you've made it this far, you probably agree with most of my assessment, but there's probably some of you who are like, listen to this boomer hating on what the kids are doing. That's not what's happening here. Yes, I'm a death metal guy. I'm wearing a death metal long sleeve right now. Of course, I love death metal, but I love all kinds of metal, which is why I started a show about it to begin with. And there are fantastic modern metalcore bands that I just absolutely adore. We already talked about the Gloom in the Corner earlier. Mikey is such a cool guy, and the concept behind that band is so cool. He really incorporates the electronic elements and the symphonic elements in a cinematic fashion that's very unique and inventive, and I really appreciate that. And there's just bands that don't do it as good as them. But there's also a lot of bands that are doing their own thing that I really appreciate. And so that's what I'm going to pick for this week's Riff of the Week. One of my favorite modern metalcore bands is Erra. E-R-R-A. And for the Riff of the Week, I'm going with Snowblind because it's noisy, it's heavy, but it's also got a beautiful, clean song section. So I don't hate clean singing, just don't be pop. Be metal if you're gonna be metal. Erra is metal. So that's the Riff of the Week, and the Riff of the Week will always be metal. And there might be an exception to that at some point if the theme of the episode calls for it, but we'll burn that bridge when we get there. In the meantime, if you love metal the way that I love metal, hit like, hit subscribe. That's all we do here twice a week. If you're on YouTube, click here. There's some more metal content that I've made that YouTube thinks you should see. But most importantly, read philosophy, listen to metal. I love you.